The late afternoon sun hung low over Maple Street, casting the kind of long shadows that make a small town look like a photograph somebody forgot to develop. The light was gold and tired. The wind carried the smell of cut grass and something burning far away. Maybe leaves, maybe someone's supper gone wrong. On the curb outside a narrow house with chipped white siding, a little girl sat alone. Her name was Ruby Calloway. She was 5 years old. She wore a pale blue dress that had belonged to some other child some other year. The hem touched the sidewalk when she sat. The sleeves fell past her wrists. Her shoes were sneakers that had once been white. The left one had a hole where her little toe pressed through like a question nobody wanted to answer. Ruby traced slow circles in the dirt with a broken twig, around and around. She did not hum. She did not cry. She simply breathed the way a child breathes when she has learned that breathing too loudly can wake the wrong person in the wrong mood. Behind her through the front window of the narrow house, Gloria Thorne was shouting into a telephone. The words did not matter. The tone did. It was the tone Ruby knew the way other children knew lullabies. Gloria Thorne was 47. She had dyed red hair and a mouth that never quite closed all the way. She was the third foster mother Ruby had known in a single calendar year. The first had smelled like cigarettes. The second had been kinder, but the kindness had run out of money somewhere around Thanksgiving. The third was Gloria. Gloria did not hit. Gloria did something quieter and in some ways worse. Gloria forgot. Gloria forgot to serve supper. Gloria forgot to lock the back door against the cold. Gloria forgot that a child in the next room could hear the telephone calls that came at 2 in the morning. The calls that used words like delivery and transport and how much and when. Ruby did not understand those words. She was 5. But she understood that they were shaped like secrets, and secrets had weight. And weight was something she had learned to carry without complaining. She was a quiet child, quieter than most. Her teachers at the preschool she had briefly attended had written notes home saying that Ruby Calloway was advanced for her age, perceptive, observant, possibly gifted. The notes had never been answered. They had been folded into drawers and forgotten along with so many other small dignities. Ruby did not know the word gifted, but she knew that if you watched a grown person long enough, you could learn which part of the room they looked at when they lied. Gloria Thorne lied toward the refrigerator, always the refrigerator. A month ago, Ruby had noticed something behind the refrigerator when Gloria had been making one of her late-night calls. A small black notebook, spiral-bound, the cover bent. Gloria had put it there when headlights swept through the kitchen curtains. The headlights belonged to a man in a dark blue car. The man had worn a gray suit. He had counted bills at the kitchen table while Ruby pretended to sleep on the couch in the next room. His hair had been silver. His hands had been clean. He had not spoken loudly. He had not needed to. Before he left, the man in the gray suit had done something Ruby would remember longer than she would remember his face. He had walked to the doorway of the room where the other foster children slept, and he had raised one finger and he had pointed it at each of them in turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like a grown man counting coins. His finger had stopped on a boy named Benji. 2 nights later, a different car had come, and Benji had not come back. After the man in the gray suit left, Gloria had opened the small black notebook and written something. Then she had put the notebook back behind the refrigerator. Ruby had waited 72 hours. She had counted 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. The way a child counts when she is trying to make time feel like something she can hold. Then one afternoon, while Gloria slept on the sofa with the television babbling a game show, Ruby had climbed onto a kitchen chair, reached behind the refrigerator, and taken the notebook down. She had not read it. She could not read yet. She knew her letters, the shapes of them, but not the way they fit together. What she had done instead was this. She had torn out 4 pages. 4 pages chosen because they had the most writing. 4 pages folded smaller, the way grown people folded dollar bills before tucking them into birthday cards. Then she had slipped the pages inside the lining of the wool sweater she wore under her dress, the sweater Gloria did not take off her because Gloria never washed her clothes often enough to notice. That had been 2 months ago. 62 nights. Ruby had worn the pages every day since. When Gloria stripped her for a bath, Ruby hid the sweater under the tub. When Gloria sent her to school, the pages came with her. When Gloria locked her in her room at night, the pages lay against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Ruby did not know what was on the pages, but she knew that the man in the gray suit had counted them like coins, and that the children he pointed at did not come back, and that 2 weeks ago when he had come again and counted again, his finger had stopped on her. She knew the names: Tyler, Sophia, a boy called Benji who had liked trains. She knew that one night soon a car would come for her, and so every morning when Ruby opened her eyes in the small bedroom Gloria had given her, she touched the place on her ribs where the pages lay hidden, and she promised them the way other children promise their prayers, that if a grown person ever looked at her the way grown people were supposed to look at children, she would give the pages to that person. She was 5 years old. She was waiting. On this particular afternoon, sitting on the curb with her broken twig, Ruby heard a new sound rising from the far end of Maple Street. It was the low thunder of a motorcycle. Ruby liked motorcycles. She did not know why. She had never ridden one. She had never touched one. But whenever she heard one in the distance, something inside her small chest opened up like a window in a room that had been sealed too long. Motorcycles, she had decided privately, sounded the way freedom would sound if freedom had a voice. The thunder grew closer, and then the black van came around the corner. Ruby did not notice the van at first. Her eyes were on the far end of the street where the motorcycle was coming into view. The rider was a big man, a leather vest, sunglasses, a beard the color of old iron. He looked, Ruby thought, like a bear made out of a man. She smiled for the first time in 3 days. The van rolled past the rider, too slow, and Ruby finally turned her head. The van had no windows in the back. The windows in the front were tinted so dark you could not see the driver. The van was coming toward her. From inside the house, Gloria Thorne shouted through the screen door. "Ruby, get in here now." Ruby stood up, brushing the dirt from her dress. The motorcycle was 50 feet away. The van was 20. Then the van stopped. The side door slid open with a sound like a cash register. A man in a baseball cap leaned out of the darkness inside. His eyes found Ruby. His hands reached for her. Ruby tried to scream. The scream did not come. Her body had learned long before today that screaming was a luxury other children could afford. She kicked. She flailed. The man was bigger than her, the way the sky was bigger than a sparrow. He lifted her into the dark mouth of the van, and for one last half second before the door slid shut and the world became metal and engine noise, Ruby turned her head toward the street. She saw the motorcycle rider. She saw his face. He had taken off his sunglasses. His eyes were locked on hers. And in those eyes, Ruby saw something she had not seen in so long. She had almost forgotten it was a thing that could exist on a grown person's face. She saw fear. For her. Then the door slammed shut. The van lurched forward, and Ruby was swallowed whole by the dark. Duke Sterling was 55 years old. He had been riding motorcycles since the summer he turned 17, and he had been riding with the Hells Angels for 30 of those years. He had a beard like iron filings. He had a spine that could no longer straighten, all the way in cold weather. He had a leather vest with patches older than most of the men who now wore them at the clubhouse up north. He also had a daughter. Her name was Josephine. Josie to him. Josie to the handful of brothers who had known her before she was gone. She had been 5 years old. The fire had happened on a Tuesday in March 20 years ago, an electrical fault in a house Duke had promised himself he would get rewired next paycheck. There had always been a next paycheck, and then suddenly there had not been. He had been 2 states away that night riding a run for the club. He had heard about it over a payphone at a truck stop outside Toledo. He had not stopped riding since. Not really. He had kept moving, town to town, chapter to chapter. Never a woman who lasted more than a winter. Never a room he did not keep an exit route from. He had buried his daughter, and then he had buried himself alive in the wind. 20 years, 800,000 miles, a beard that had gone from brown to gray while he was not paying attention. And now on an ordinary Thursday afternoon in western Pennsylvania, he was riding down a quiet residential street for no reason he could have named on his way from nothing to nowhere, when a little girl's eyes had locked onto his from the dark of a stranger's van. He saw her for 1 second, maybe 2. It was enough. Her eyes were brown. Josie's eyes had been brown. Duke kept riding. His hands did what his hands had always done. They held the bars, the bike kept moving. The van pulled away the little girl inside it, and Duke rolled straight through the next intersection and the next and the next. That is not your problem, he told himself inside the rush of the wind. That is not your kid. That was somebody else's kid and somebody else's mess, and somebody else will come along and handle it. But his hands had started to shake, just a little, just enough that he could feel it through the leather of his gloves. His hands had not shaken in 20 years, not during a bar fight, not during a police stop, not during any of the nights when he had sat on the edge of a motel bed at 3 in the morning, wondering what it would feel like to turn the pistol around and put it to his own temple. His hands had been steel. Now they were shaking, because Josie had looked at him like that. The night he had left on that last run, she had stood in the doorway in pajamas with little yellow ducks on them, and she had looked up at him, and her eyes had said the same thing this little girl's eyes had just said. Daddy, please. He had kissed her on the forehead. He had promised he would be home by Friday. He had not been home by Friday. Duke hit the brakes so hard the rear tire skidded 6 feet. Cars honked. Somebody shouted something through an open window. He did not hear any of it. He was already turning the bike around. He was already chasing the van. He did not know what he was going to do when he caught it. He did not know if the men inside were armed. He did not know if he would live through the next hour. What he knew was that he was not going to watch another little girl disappear while he rode the other way. The van was fast, but the van had to obey traffic laws. Duke did not. He slid his bike between cars. He ran 2 red lights. He felt his knee scrape a mailbox on a tight corner, and he barely noticed. The van was 3 blocks ahead of him, then 2, then 1, and then as it turned east onto the county road that led out of town, it was exactly 1 blue Ford Taurus away from his front tire. He eased off. He let the Taurus stay between them. He had done this before in another life, when surveillance had been something the club needed, and he had volunteered because he was one of the few members who knew how to stay back without losing the target. Old muscle memory waking up under his jacket. The van took the county road for 11 miles. Duke hung back a 1/4 mile. The Taurus eventually turned off at a gas station. Duke slowed further, letting the van stretch its lead, keeping it just barely in sight. Farmland opened up on either side of the road. Cornfields going yellow at the edges. Barns leaning at angles that had been the same for decades. An old Pennsylvania hillside country where the houses were far apart and the neighbors did not ask questions. The van turned onto a dirt road that cut through a stand of maples. Duke pulled his bike into the brush at the corner and killed the engine. He waited. He listened. The van's engine faded up the dirt road and then stopped. A door slammed. Two doors, muffled voices, then silence. Duke pushed his bike deeper into the brush and covered it with branches. He took a small pair of binoculars from his saddlebag. He took a folding knife and slipped it into his boot. Then he began to walk. The dirt road ran half a mile through the maples before it opened into a clearing. In the clearing stood a farmhouse. The farmhouse had once been white. Now it was the color of old teeth. The porch sagged on one side, the roof needed shingles. A single bulb burned over the front door, yellow and tired. The black van was parked beside the porch. Duke crouched behind an oak tree at the edge of the tree line and raised the binoculars. A man and a woman were carrying the little girl into the house, not dragging her, not throwing her, carrying her. The man was in his 40s, thin, balding. He wore a work shirt the color of old coffee. He walked the way tired men walk, shoulders forward, knees careful. The woman was younger, 35 maybe. She held the little girl against her chest the way a mother holds a child who has just scraped her knee. The little girl was not struggling. She was looking over the woman's shoulder out toward the trees. Duke lowered the binoculars. Something was wrong. Not wrong the way he had expected wrong. Something else. Something he did not yet have a name for. The woman kissed the top of the little girl's head as they went inside. The screen door banged shut behind them. Duke waited. The sun went down. The windows of the farmhouse lit up one by one, warm yellow squares in the blue Pennsylvania dusk. Duke moved. He crossed the 50 yards of open ground in a crouched run, the kind he had not done in 15 years. His old knees complaining, but his old instincts still sharp enough to carry him. He pressed his back against the rear wall of the farmhouse. He listened. Inside, he heard a kettle whistle. He heard a woman's voice, soft the way a voice gets when it is speaking to a child. He heard a child's voice answer. He heard no crying, no pleading, no threats. Duke frowned. He eased his way along the back of the house until he reached a window that glowed with kitchen light. The window was cracked open at the bottom to let in the cool evening air. He crouched below the sill, slow, careful, and then he raised his head just enough to see inside. The kitchen was small, worn linoleum, a scratched table with 4 chairs, an oven that looked older than Duke's first motorcycle. At the stove, the balding man was stirring a pot of soup. At the table, the woman sat beside the little girl. The little girl had a box of crayons in front of her and a piece of paper. The woman was guiding the little girl's hand, gently helping her draw what looked like a sun. The little girl was not crying, she was concentrating. The woman reached over with a kitchen towel and wiped a smudge of crayon wax from the little girl's chin. The gesture was automatic, motherly, the gesture of a woman who had done it 1,000 times for another child. On the wall above the stove hung a framed photograph. Duke raised the binoculars again through the gap in the curtain. The photograph was of a little girl. Not this little girl, a different one, younger than the one at the table, thinner, pale, wearing a knit cap on a head that had clearly lost its hair, hospital bracelet on her wrist, smiling anyway. Duke lowered the binoculars. His stomach went cold. He did not know what he had expected to find in this farmhouse. Traffickers, maybe. Some cartel cell using a back road as a pipeline. Men with guns and tattoos and a little girl in a closet. He had not expected this. He had not expected a man in a work shirt stirring soup. He had not expected a dead daughter on the kitchen wall. He lowered himself back below the sill and leaned his forehead against the cold wood of the farmhouse. He stayed there a long time. Inside, the soup bubbled. The little girl laughed. The sound of it went through Duke like a bullet that had been waiting 20 years for a target. The first bowl of soup went in front of the little girl. The second went in front of the woman. The man sat down across from them with his own bowl and bowed his head. Duke could not hear the grace, but he could see the shape of it. All three of them linked by hands across the small table. Duke could not remember the last time he had said grace. He watched. The little girl ate carefully. She blew on each spoonful before she put it in her mouth. She did not eat fast. She ate the way a child eats when she is not yet sure whether the food in front of her is a trap. Halfway through her bowl, the little girl stopped eating. She looked up at the woman. She said something Duke could not hear. The woman leaned in. The woman listened. The woman nodded. Then the woman stood up and crossed to the stove and returned with a small plate of crackers. And she set 5 crackers, not 4, not 6 exactly, 5 in a careful row in front of the little girl. The little girl reached for one. She paused. She offered the first cracker to the woman instead. The woman smiled and shook her head and pressed the cracker gently back into the little girl's hand. Duke, crouched in the dark, felt his throat close. This was not a kidnapping. He did not know what it was, but it was not what he had come here to find. He sat on the cold ground with his back against the farmhouse wall for what must have been 2 hours. Long enough for dinner to end. Long enough for dishes to be washed. Long enough for the little girl to be taken upstairs into a room whose window glowed soft pink from a nightlight, and for a woman's voice muffled through the siding to sing something quiet and lullaby-shaped. Duke listened. Josie had liked the same song. He was almost sure of it, or one very much like it. He was not going to leave here tonight. He had already decided that, but he did not yet know what he was going to do in the morning. Duke circled the farmhouse one more time, mapping it the way he had once mapped safe houses and drop points. Front door, back door, basement cellar with a bulkhead that looked rusted shut. Second floor windows, the little girl's room, pink glow second from the left. The master bedroom across the hall, dark now. He was coming around the north side of the house, moving slow under the kitchen window, when something small and soft bounced off his boot. He froze. He looked down. On the grass beside his foot lay a teddy bear, brown, worn, one eye missing. The remaining eye a glass marble that caught the moonlight. Duke looked up at the kitchen window. The window was open 3 inches at the bottom. He had not seen it open before. There was no one visible in the window. But as Duke stood very still, he heard a tiny, tiny sound from inside the kitchen. The sound of bare feet on linoleum moving away fast the way a 5-year-old moves when she is not supposed to be downstairs. Duke picked up the teddy bear. His rough hand closed around it. Something inside the bear crinkled. Duke turned the bear over. The stitching along the torn ear had been picked open. Something was stuffed inside. He worked 2 fingers into the hole gently the way he used to untangle fishing line for Josie. He pulled out a small folded square of paper. He unfolded it in the moonlight. On the paper, drawn in what looked like red crayon, was a single letter, H. Just the one letter. The crayon had pressed so hard into the paper that the paper had torn a little at the top of the line. Duke stared at it. He did not understand at first, then he did. The little girl did not know how to write the whole word. She knew the first letter. Duke sat down heavily in the wet grass with the teddy bear in one hand and the crayoned H in the other, and for the first time in 20 years, he did not know if he was going to be able to stand back up. He sat there a long time, Somewhere inside the farmhouse, a child who did not yet know his name had just asked him for help. He folded the paper small. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his vest against the place where for 2 decades he had carried a single photograph of a little girl in pigtails. He put the teddy bear back on the grass, face toward the window, propped up against a tuft of weeds so that when morning came, anyone in the kitchen would see that the bear had been found and understood and set back in its place like a promise received. Then Duke Sterling walked back to his motorcycle in the trees, and he disconnected the spark plug wire on the number 2 cylinder, because what he had decided sitting in the grass was that tomorrow he was going to limp this bike up to that farmhouse, and he was going to ask for help, and he was going to stay, and he was going to find out what was happening here. And he was not going anywhere until the little girl with the brown eyes and the crayoned H and the teddy bear in the grass was safe. Morning came up gray and slow over the Pennsylvania hills. Duke wheeled his bike up the dirt road with the engine dead, letting the front tire pick its way through the ruts. He was dressed the way he had been dressed yesterday, leather and denim and road dust, but he had shaved in the small mirror he kept in his saddlebag, and he had slicked back his hair, and he had arranged his face into something he hoped looked more tired than dangerous. The farmhouse door opened before he reached the porch. The balding man stepped out, a baseball bat in one hand held low along his leg, not raised but not put away either. Duke stopped 20 feet from the porch. He raised one hand, palm open. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough from the cold. The balding man said nothing. Duke nodded at his bike. Spark plug wire shook loose somewhere back on the county road. "I can fix it. Just need a flat place to stand in 10 minutes with a wrench. I was hoping a phone, but if you've got a patch of concrete, I can get back on the road without bothering you further." The bat did not move. From the doorway behind the man, the woman appeared. And behind the woman, holding the woman's hand, peeking out with wide brown eyes that Duke now felt in the center of his chest like a second heartbeat, was the little girl. The little girl looked at Duke. Duke looked at the little girl. Her eyes went very slightly wider. Recognition. She knew. She knew he had picked up the bear. She knew he had read the H. Duke did not let his face change. He kept looking at the balding man. He kept his hand up. "Edith," the balding man said without looking back. "Take her inside." The woman hesitated. The little girl spoke. Her voice was high and soft and carried farther in the morning air than a voice that small had any right to carry. "It's okay," she said. "He has a nice motorcycle." The balding man's shoulders dropped half an inch. The woman named Edith looked at the balding man, and then at Duke, and then at the little girl, and then back at the balding man, and something passed between the two adults that Duke had seen pass between married people 100 times before the silent question, the silent answer. The balding man lowered the bat. "There's a slab of concrete by the barn," he said. Duke nodded, much appreciated. "Wendell," the balding man said. "My name's Wendell Webb. This is my wife Edith. And this is—" He hesitated. "Ruby," the little girl said. "My name is Ruby." Her eyes never left Duke's face. "Duke Sterling." Duke said, "Pleased to meet you, folks." He wheeled his bike toward the barn slab. Behind him, he heard the screen door open. He heard the soft pad of small feet crossing the porch. He heard the voice of Edith Webb call out, not too sharp, just cautious, "Ruby, honey, stay here with Mommy." The words stopped Duke cold. "Mommy." He did not turn around. He kept walking toward the barn. Behind him, very quietly, he heard Ruby answer, "Okay, Mommy." The words sat inside Duke's chest like a stone dropped down a well. He understood now, or part of him did. The dead daughter on the kitchen wall, the soup, the lullaby, the woman who called herself Mommy and a child who had at 5 years old calculated that calling her back would keep her fed and warm and alive until the cavalry came. Ruby was not a kidnapped victim in the way Duke had imagined. Ruby was a survivor who had been moved from one cage to another, and she had, with the ancient calm of children raised without safety, decided which cage gave her the most room to breathe while she waited for someone to notice the light under her door. She had tried to notice him last night. Duke set his jaw. He knelt beside his bike in the slab of concrete. He popped the side cover. He began to fake a repair. He was not leaving this farm. Not today. Not until he knew everything that was in this child's sweater. The broken bike bought him 2 hours. Wendell Webb came out once to offer a wrench from the shed. Duke accepted the wrench and used it. Wendell stayed pretending to watch the way a man pretends to watch a repair when what he is really doing is watching the stranger. Edith brought lemonade in a pitcher and poured 2 glasses. Ruby came with her. Ruby carried the one-eyed teddy bear against her chest. She watched Duke the whole time, her small face careful, her small mouth silent. Duke finished the repair with more ceremony than it needed straightening, wiping his hands. "That's got it," he said. "Good as she'll go until I can get proper wire at a shop." Wendell nodded. "Storm's coming in tonight," he said. "Forecast says it'll be a mean one." Duke looked at the sky. There were no clouds, but he was not going to correct the man. Wendell swallowed, looking at Edith. Edith looked at Ruby. Ruby looked at Duke. "You can sleep in the barn," Wendell said finally. "Cot out there. Dry enough, just until the storm passes." "Much obliged," Duke said. Ruby stepped forward and held up her teddy bear. "His name is Bear," she said. "He says you can stay." Duke knelt down slow, the way a man kneels when he is used to being larger than everyone else and is trying very hard not to be frightening. "He says that, does he?" Ruby nodded. "He also says," she said very quietly, quieter than she had said on anything yet, "that you are Mr. Bear too now." Duke felt the word land. Mr. Bear. Nobody had given him a soft name in 20 years. The brothers called him Ironheart. His enemies called him worse. His daughter once had called him Daddy. Mr. Bear. He cleared his throat against something hot and close. "Then I'll do my best," he said, "to be worthy of the name." Ruby nodded, once solemn as a judge. Then she turned and went back to Edith and put her small hand back into Edith's larger one, and together the two of them walked back into the house. Duke stayed kneeling on the concrete a moment longer than he needed to. Lunch was sandwiches on the picnic table under the oak. Supper was stew from a pot that had been simmering since noon. Between the 2 meals, Duke fixed the sagging porch step and replaced a gasket on the water pump. Wendell worked beside him, quiet at first, and then slowly not quiet. Duke learned in pieces across the long afternoon what he needed to learn. He learned that the little girl in the hospital photograph had been Hazel Webb. He learned that Hazel had been 4 years and 7 months old when the leukemia took her 6 months ago. He learned that Wendell had worked at a boring little machine shop outside Pittsburgh until the medical bills had eaten his job the way termites eat a porch. He learned that Edith had not slept more than 3 hours in a row since the funeral. He learned that the farmhouse had belonged to Wendell's late uncle and was the only thing the bank had not yet taken. And he learned when Wendell's voice finally cracked open over a bucket of pump parts that 3 weeks ago a man in a blue car had driven out to this farmhouse and offered Wendell Webb $40,000 in cash. Duke did not ask what the $40,000 had been for. He did not have to. He already knew. He kept his face steady. He kept his hands moving on the wrench. Inside him, very quietly, something that had been sleeping for 20 years was waking up, and it was not gentle, and it was not tired anymore. Night came in with real clouds, this time the forecast getting lucky. Rain pattered on the barn roof. Duke sat on the cot in the barn with a kerosene lantern and his vest folded across his knees, and he listened to the farmhouse through the open door. He heard Edith sing the lullaby again. He heard a small voice answer drowsy. He heard Wendell whisper something in the kitchen, and Edith whisper back, and then the lights went out one by one. Duke did not sleep. He sat with the crayoned H unfolded in his lap, and he waited. He did not know what he was waiting for, until the barn door creaked open. It opened 6 inches, then 10. Then a small, pale nightgown-shaped figure slipped through the gap. Ruby, barefoot, clutching bear, her hair sleep mussed, her eyes enormous in the lantern light. Duke did not move. Slowly he folded the crayoned H back into his pocket. Slowly he patted the cot beside him. Ruby crossed the barn on her soundless bare feet and climbed up onto the cot and sat cross-legged beside him. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Ruby reached under her nightgown and pulled out a folded wad of paper pressed flat by 62 nights of being worn against a child's ribs. She held it out to Duke in both hands. "I can't read," she whispered. "I took them from behind the refrigerator. Miss Gloria didn't see. She hid them. A man in a gray suit gave her money and she wrote it in this and she hid it. And the man in the gray suit, he counts us. He comes to the house at night and he points his finger and he counts." Ruby lifted her own small finger and in the lantern light, she demonstrated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "Whichever one he stops on," she whispered, "is the one that goes in the next car. And the one who goes away does not come back." Duke did not move. Ruby's small chin set. "Tyler went in March," she said. "Sophia went in May. Benji went in July. He liked trains." Her voice did not shake. Her eyes did. "2 weeks ago," she said, "he stopped on me." She pressed the papers harder into Duke's hand. "The Webbs are not the bad ones," she whispered. "They are sad. But they are not the bad ones. The bad ones are the ones who paid them. And the ones who paid them are the ones who were going to pay Miss Gloria for me." She took a breath. Her small hand closed around Duke's thumb the way a baby's hand closes around an offered finger, except Ruby was not a baby and her grip was iron. "Mr. Bear," she whispered, "please, please tell me you can read." Duke looked down at the 4 folded pages in his palm. He looked at the little girl whose hand was holding his thumb as if it were the last rope in a flood. Outside, the rain came down harder. Inside the barn, a lantern burned. And Duke Sterling, 55 years old, Hell's Angel father of a dead girl named Josephine, opened the 4 folded pages very slowly and he held them up to the lantern light and he began to read. The 4 pages were smaller than Duke had expected. Folded, refolded, pressed flat for 62 nights against a child's ribs. The paper had gone soft at the creases the way a dollar bill goes soft when it has lived too long in a working man's pocket. Duke laid them out on the cot one beside the other in the yellow light of the kerosene lantern. Ruby watched his face. Her small hand stayed closed around his thumb. Duke read. The first page was a list of dates. Not dates the way a school teacher writes dates. Dates the way a bookkeeper writes them, clean and careful, and beneath the next with tick marks beside some and small crosses beside others. The dates went back 18 months. Beside each date was a first name. Tyler, Sophia, Benji, Marcus, Annalise, Devin, Chloe, 7 names, 7 children. Beside each name was a dollar amount. The amounts were not small. 12,000, 15,000, 9,000 for the boy named Devin, which made something in Duke's chest bend the wrong way. Because even the traffickers, it seemed, had decided what a boy named Devin was worth and had decided it was less than a girl named Chloe. At the bottom of the page, circled twice in ballpoint pen, was a new entry. No date yet, just a name. Ruby, 18,000. Duke did not let his face change. He did not let his breath change. Ruby was watching him. Ruby was 5 years old, and Ruby was watching his face the way a pilot watches an instrument panel, looking for the needle that tells her whether the engine is about to quit. He made sure the needle did not move. He turned the page. The second page was addresses. 3 of them, all post office boxes, all in small towns Duke had never heard of, spread across a triangle of western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio. Next to each address was a code, 2 letters and 3 numbers, the way a shipper codes a route. The third page was phone numbers, 2 numbers, both with area codes Duke recognized. Local, within 20 miles of where they sat. The fourth page was the one that made the bottom of his stomach go cold. It was a photocopy, a piece of a larger document torn along one edge, clearly pulled out of a folder the original owner had not meant to open in this kitchen. The header at the top read County Department of Child and Family Services, followed by a case number. Below the header in official print was a list of 7 children, the same 7 names, each one flagged with the word relocated, and a date that matched to the day one of the dates on the first page. And at the bottom of the fourth page, typed in clean black letters above a signature line. Duke could not quite read. In the lantern light was the title, Chairman Regional Foster Care Oversight Committee. The signature above the title was short and bold, and the capital C of the first name looked even scribbled the way important men sign things. Duke did not need to read the last name. He already had a feeling. He folded the fourth page over to hide it from Ruby's eyes. Then he closed the other 3 on top of it. Then he took Ruby's small hand off his thumb gently, and he closed her hand around the stack of papers. "You keep these," he said quietly, "a little bit longer." Ruby nodded once. "You know what they are," she whispered. "Don't you? I know enough." She looked at him. "Are the Webbs going to go to jail?" she said. Duke did not answer right away. "They did a wrong thing," he said. "I'm not gonna lie to you." Ruby nodded as if that was the answer she had expected and the one she could live with. But Duke said the man who paid them, the man in the gray suit, the one who counts you. Ruby looked up at him. "That one," Duke said, "is not going to walk away." Ruby considered this. Then she climbed down off the cot and padded back across the barn floor on her bare feet. At the door, she turned around. Her nightgown glowed faintly in the lantern light. Her hair was a halo of brown. She held the teddy bear against her chest with one arm and the 4 folded pages in her other hand. And she looked, Duke thought, like nothing on earth so much as a child walking out of a fire. "Mr. Bear," she whispered. "Yes, honey." "Tomorrow," she said, "we have to tell the Webbs." Duke opened his mouth to say no, not yet. "Not until I understand what to do with this," but Ruby was already shaking her head at him. "They have to know," she said, "that they were the ones who were wrong. But they are not the bad ones. The bad ones are bigger. They have to know so they can stop being scared of being caught and start being scared of the right thing." Duke stared at her. 5 years old. He nodded. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow." Ruby slipped out of the barn into the dark. The rain was softer now. Duke sat on the cot a long time with the lantern guttering down to nothing. He thought about a photograph of his daughter Josephine he had not looked at in 11 months. He thought about a fire he had not been home to fight. He thought about all the ways a grown man can spend 20 years on a motorcycle pretending the road is wide enough to outrun a 5-year-old's eyes. It was not. He had known that somewhere the whole time. He blew out the lantern. He did not sleep. He lay on his back in the dark, and he listened to the rain on the barn roof, and he planned. Morning came up washed and clean. The storm gone, the sky so blue it looked borrowed. Duke walked up to the farmhouse with his shoulders set. Edith was on the porch with a cup of coffee. She had slept even less than he had. Her eyes were red-rimmed and soft. "Morning," she said. "Mrs. Webb," Duke said. "Your husband in the kitchen." She nodded slow. Ruby up Edith's mouth turned up the ghost of a smile. She was up at 6. She wanted to help make biscuits. Duke nodded. "I need to talk to all three of you," he said. "After breakfast. Ruby, too." Edith's smile fell away. "What is this about?" she said. Duke looked her in the eye. "It's about what happens next," he said. "For everyone." Edith's hand tightened on the coffee cup. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. Breakfast was biscuits and sausage gravy. Ruby ate 2 biscuits and a small plate of gravy. Edith ate half a biscuit and stirred her coffee. Wendell ate nothing at all. When the plates were cleared, Duke did not let the silence settle. He laid the 4 folded pages out on the table. Ruby had carried them down in the pocket of her dress. Wendell looked at them. Edith looked at them. Ruby climbed into the chair beside Duke and did not reach for his hand. She did not need to. She was in that moment 5 years old and steadier than the 2 grown people across the table. Duke spoke quietly. "Ruby took these," he said from behind the refrigerator at the woman who was fostering her. 2 months ago. She's been carrying them in the lining of her sweater ever since." Edith put her hand over her mouth. Wendell went very still. Duke turned the pages so the Webbs could see them right side up. "This," he said, tapping the first page, "is a list of kids. 7 of them. Dates. Amounts. This tapping the second is drop addresses. This tapping the third is phone numbers. And this." He turned over the 4th page. "This is a county document. It lists the same 7 kids as having been, and I'm reading the official word here, relocated." Wendell's eyes dropped to the title line at the bottom. His face went the color of the gravy left on his plate. Edith made a small sound in her throat. "The same man," Duke said. "The same man who paid you." Wendell's mouth opened. Closed. Opened. He did not say a name. He didn't have to. Edith reached across the table and took hold of her husband's wrist so hard her knuckles went white. "Ruby," she whispered, "honey, go into the living room." Ruby did not move. "I want to stay," Ruby said. "Sweetheart," Edith said, and her voice broke on the word. Ruby looked up at her with those brown eyes that Duke would now never in his life stop seeing. "Mrs. Webb," Ruby said, "you are very sad. I know you are very sad, and you are not one of the bad ones. I know that too. But I am the one who carried these for 62 days, so I get to stay." Nobody answered her. After a moment, Wendell put his head in his hands and began silently to shake. Duke let him shake. When Wendell finally raised his head, his face was wet. "His name," Wendell said, "is Roland Caldwell." Ruby's small head came up. She was looking at Wendell with a different expression now. Not sorrow, not forgiveness, something sharper. "Say that name again," she said. Wendell blinked at her through his tears. "Roland Caldwell," he said. Ruby's face went still. "I know him," she said. The kitchen went quiet. Duke turned in his chair. "Honey," he said carefully, "what do you mean you know him?" Ruby looked at Duke. "The man in the gray suit," she said. "The one who gave Miss Gloria the money and wrote in the book." "That is his name." Miss Gloria said it into the telephone one night when she thought I was asleep. She said, "Mr. Caldwell is coming." She said, "Mr. Caldwell says this one is worth 18." Duke's blood went cold. Ruby lifted her small finger. He came to the house, she said, more than once. He wore a gray suit. He had white hair. He counted us. She moved her finger slowly in the air, the way she had demonstrated in the barn the night before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whichever one he stopped on, she said that was the one that went in the next car. He stopped on Tyler in March, on Sophia in May, on Benji in July, and the last time he came 2 weeks ago, he stopped on me. Edith made a sound that was not a word. She collapsed sideways into her husband's shoulder and cried the way a woman cried when she has been carrying a thing too heavy for too long and has finally been allowed to put it down. Wendell wrapped his arm around her and held on. Duke sat very still with his hands folded on the table. A county commissioner, Wendell said eventually into his wife's hair. He's on the foster care oversight board. He's on the hospital board. He was on the board that denied our final appeal for the experimental treatment, said the cost per life year was too high. Wendell's voice went flat the way a voice goes when it has run out of anywhere else to go. 6 weeks after we buried Hazel, he said he showed up at the door. He said he'd heard we were behind on the mortgage. He said there was an arrangement he could make. He gave me $40,000 in cash, in a lunch cooler. Edith's hand had not left his wrist. He said Wendell said that all we had to do was take one child, the one he'd point us to, and hold her for a week, and then hand her off at a location he would tell us when the time came. He said if we did that, the $40,000 was ours to keep, and the house stayed ours, and his people in the bank would make sure the foreclosure paperwork went away. Wendell's throat worked. He pointed us at a child from a wealthy family in Ridgewood, Wendell said. He gave us an address and a schedule. We were supposed to take her on her way home from ballet on a Thursday. He looked at Ruby. We went to the wrong street, he whispered. We were 2 blocks off. We saw a little girl sitting alone on a curb. We thought she looked like. His voice gave out. He did not finish. Ruby, still standing beside her chair, put her small hand gently on Edith's forearm. You thought I looked like Hazel, she said. Edith nodded into her husband's shoulder. Ruby kept her hand where it was. It's okay, she said. I knew the whole time. Duke looked at all 3 of them and felt in that moment that he was the youngest person in the room. After a long time, Wendell spoke into his wife's hair. What do we do? He said, to Duke, not to Edith. Duke, what do we do? Duke folded the pages carefully back into a stack. You're going to turn yourselves in, he said. Edith's shoulders jerked. Not yet, Duke said. Not today. Wendell looked up. We do it right, Duke said. We do it with a lawyer. We do it with the statement ready. We do it with everything Ruby has in those pages, so ready, in front of a prosecutor who does not work for Roland Caldwell. That means a state prosecutor, not the county. That means federal if I can get us there. We do it in a way that Caldwell cannot bury, and we do it in a way that keeps Ruby out of Gloria Thorne's reach forever, starting the minute you walk through the courthouse door. Wendell was shaking his head slow, but not in refusal, in shock. How, he said, how do we do that? Duke stood up. I know a woman in town, he said, who knows a lawyer. I'll be back before supper. He knelt down beside Ruby's chair. I need to take these with me, he said. A lawyer has to see them. A real one, not a county one. Ruby looked at the pages on the table. She looked back at him. They are my pages, she said quietly. I know they are. She considered this. You bring them back, she said. I bring them back. Promise. I promise. Ruby nodded, once solemn as a judge, and slid the 4 folded pages across the table into Duke's hand. Duke put them inside his vest against his ribs, in the exact place she had carried them for 62 days. Then he stood. "Wendell," he said. "Yeah," Wendell said. "If a blue car comes up that road before I get back," Duke said, "you take your wife and that child out the cellar bulkhead and you run north through the maples to the creek, and you follow the creek downstream until you hit a road. You do not open the front door. You do not answer the phone. You do not look out the window." Wendell swallowed. "Yeah," he said. Duke walked out to his bike. The diner was called Opal's after its owner. Opal Finch was 68 years old. She wore her silver hair in a loose braid and her reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She had run this diner for 31 years on the corner of Main and Linden in the little town of Millbrook, and there was not a piece of gossip inside the county line that had not at some point eaten pie at her counter. Duke had met her once before, 2 days back on his way through town. He had ordered the special. She had poured him coffee. She had looked at the patches on his vest and had not flinched, and had said in a voice like a lit match, "You are carrying something heavy, mister, and I do not mean those saddlebags." He had not forgotten that. The bell over the door jingled when he walked in. The lunch crowd was 3 old men in a booth and a young mother with a baby at the counter. Opal was at the register running a tape. She looked up. Her eyes went still for half a second, the way a hunter's eyes go still. Then she smiled at her customers and called sweet as syrup, "Go on and take that back booth, honey. I'll be right with you." Duke took the back booth. She came over with the coffee pot and a cup and slid into the seat across from him, and before he had said one word, she said, "You found something." He looked at her. She looked back. "You walked in here 2 days ago," she said, "asking about lawyers who work with kids. Then you stopped coming in. That means either you went home or you found something. And you do not look like a man who went home." Duke reached across the table and put the 4 folded pages in front of her. He said, "I need your nephew. I need him in Millbrook by tonight. I need him sober. I need him to have never once in his life shaken Roland Caldwell's hand." Opal Finch's smile did not change. Her hand moved, though. Her hand reached out and turned the top page around, and she unfolded it, and she put on her reading glasses, and she read. The blood left her face slowly, the way blood leaves a face when the heart has decided to pull it somewhere else. She read the first page. She read the second. She read the third. She read the fourth. She lowered the pages. She took her glasses off. She looked past Duke out the front window of the diner at the sidewalk and the parking meters and the American flag on the pole in front of the post office across the street, and she said very softly, without looking at him, "My grandson went missing from a foster home outside Erie 16 months ago, Mr. Sterling. His name is Marcus." Duke did not breathe. Opal's eyes came back to his. Her eyes were not wet. Her eyes were steel. "My daughter," she said, "drank herself to death over it last April. She thought he'd run away. The county told her he'd been placed out of state for his safety. The county told her she could not have visitation because the record was sealed. The county told her to stop calling." She folded the pages back up slowly and slid them back across the table to Duke. "My nephew's name is Shepard Finch," she said. "He is 39 years old. He graduated third in his class at Penn State Law. He has never once shaken Roland Caldwell's hand because he has spent the last 6 years trying to get Caldwell disbarred from the Foster Care Oversight Board, and every ethics complaint he has ever filed has been buried in the county clerk's office." She stood up. "He will be in Millbrook by 5 o'clock this afternoon," she said. "I am going to call him right now." She paused. "Mr. Sterling," she said. "Yes, ma'am. That little girl," she said. "Is she still alive?" "She is," Duke said. Opal closed her eyes for a second. Then you bring her in here, she said at 4:30. You park that motorcycle in the alley. You come in the back door. My nephew will be here. We will figure out the rest. She walked back to the register. Duke sat for a long time with the pages in his hand. When he stood up to leave, the young mother with the baby at the counter smiled shyly at him and said, "Sir, I love your vest." Duke touched the brim of an imaginary hat to her and walked out into the sun. He did not drive straight back to the farm. He drove out to a rise of land 2 miles west of the Webb place, a piece of ridge where cell service was strongest, and he sat on his bike and he pulled out the cheap flip phone he used maybe 4 times a year, and he made 3 calls. The first call was to a man in Pittsburgh he had not spoken to in 11 years. A brother, former brother, chapter president north of the state. A man named Burl Madigan who owed Duke a favor so old it had grown moss. Burl, Duke said when the line picked up, "It's Ironheart." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Burl said, "Well, I will be damned. I need a favor," Duke said. "Not a small one." Burl laughed once low. "Go on, brother." "I need Sparrow," Duke said, "and Pitchfork, and Grizzly. I need them in Millbrook by tomorrow morning. I need every man in the chapter who can still throw a leg over a bike to be there by sundown tomorrow. I am not asking for violence. I am asking for numbers. I am asking for quiet professionals. A lawyer will have the paperwork. Numbers are the part I need from you." Burl did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "How many kids, Ironheart?" "7 so far," Duke said. "A little girl is number 8 if I do not move fast." Burl exhaled. "Done," he said. "And brother," he said, before Duke could thank him, "Yeah, welcome back." The line went dead. The second call was to a woman in Philadelphia named Joyce Brennan, who worked for the state attorney general's office and whose son's life Duke had once a long time ago kept from getting shorter in a county lockup. She did not answer. He left a message with her direct extension. He kept it vague. He used the word federal. He used the word trafficking. He used her son's name at the end because she would understand, and he hung up. The third call was to Child Protective Services. He did not identify himself. He used a public tip line. He gave the address of Gloria Thorne's foster home on Maple Street. He said, "There is a child being fostered at this address who is not safe. I have reason to believe the foster parent is involved in the disappearance of multiple children from the county foster system. The children's names are Tyler, Sophia, Benji, Marcus, Annalise, Devin, and Chloe. I have documents to support this. Those documents will be delivered today to Shepard Finch, attorney at Opal's Diner in Millbrook at 4:30. He hung up. He sat on the ridge a moment longer, looking east across the maples toward the Webb farm. Then he started the bike. He got back to the farmhouse at 3. He had planned to walk Ruby through what was about to happen. He had planned to sit her down on the porch swing and explain in words a 5-year-old could hold that at 4:30 a man named Shepard was going to meet them, and that the Webbs were going to sit down with Shepard, and that Shepard was going to help them tell the truth in a way that kept her safe. He had planned this on the ride home, rehearsing the words in the wind. He did not get to say any of them. As he came up the dirt road, he saw the cruiser, 3 cruisers, and a black county SUV, and an unmarked white van with the word transport stenciled on the side in small bureaucratic letters. Every vehicle had its lights on. Every vehicle was parked in the dirt yard of the Webb farmhouse. Duke stopped his bike 50 yards back inside the tree line. He killed the engine. He watched. From the porch of the farmhouse, Wendell Webb was being walked to a cruiser in handcuffs. His head was down. His lip was bleeding. One of the officers had a hand on the back of his neck, the way a man handles a calf he intends to brand. From the front door, Edith Webb was being led out by a female officer. Edith was not in cuffs. Edith was weeping openly, loudly, her whole body buckling with each step. The officer was half supporting her. And from the side of the house, carried in the arms of a woman in a gray blazer with a lanyard around her neck, was Ruby. Ruby was screaming, not crying, screaming. Ruby had been the quietest child Duke had ever met, and now she was screaming the way a seagull screams, raw and endless, and she was kicking, and her little arms were reaching not toward the Webbs, not toward the house, but toward the tree line, toward him. Mr. Bear, Mr. Bear, Mr. Bear. Duke did not move. Every muscle in his body wanted to move. Every muscle was on fire with wanting to move. He wanted to walk out of the maples and break the jaw of the woman carrying his little girl. He did not move because he saw behind the line of cruisers parked alone at the back a fourth vehicle, an unmarked sedan, dark blue. A man in the driver's seat. He did not get out. He was watching the arrest through the windshield with the patient, pleased expression of a man watching a long investment finally mature. The man was in his 60s, silver hair, a clean gray suit, a face Duke had seen once in a photograph on the wall of the Millbrook Town Hall the day he had walked by on his way to the diner. Roland Caldwell. Duke's hand moved toward the inside of his vest. The photograph of Josephine was there. The crayoned H was there. He did not draw anything. Instead, he watched. Ruby had stopped reaching for him. She was doing something specific with her right hand now, even while she screamed, even while she kicked. She was worrying at the hem of her sweater. Not her dress, her sweater. The wool sweater she had worn against her ribs for 62 nights and had kept on this morning under her dress because Duke had told her not to take it off. Ruby was pulling at the lining. The woman in the gray blazer bent to set Ruby into the back of the transport van. For 2 seconds, her hip turned her attention. Split, she was bracing Ruby with one arm and reaching for a seatbelt strap with the other. In those 2 seconds, Ruby did 2 things. The first was that she freed a small folded corner of paper from the sweater lining. The second was that she jammed it hard with a small clenched fist into the back pocket of her own dress. Then she went limp very suddenly, the way a child goes limp when she has decided mid-tantrum to conserve her strength. The woman strapped her in. The door slid shut. Ruby's screaming went muffled. Duke let out the breath he had been holding. His hands were still shaking. They had been shaking for 2 days. He memorized the license plate of the transport van. He memorized the faces of the officers. He memorized which cruiser Wendell was in and which cruiser Edith was in. He watched Roland Caldwell sit behind the wheel of the dark blue sedan and speak into a cell phone, his lips moving unhurried, pleased. Then Caldwell put the phone down, started the engine, and drove slowly up the dirt road toward the county highway. Duke waited until the sound of the sedan faded. Then he walked out of the trees and crossed the empty yard. The farmhouse door stood open. The screen hung half off its hinge. A coffee cup had been knocked off the porch rail and had broken on the step. Duke did not go inside. He walked to his bike. He sat on it a moment, his hands on the bars. The 4 pages from the Webb kitchen were in his vest against his ribs. He could feel them there. But Ruby, he understood, now had not sent them with him when she had slid them across the table that morning. Ruby had given him only what she thought he could carry safely out of the farmhouse. She had kept 1 more page for herself, a single page, something she had torn from the notebook separately maybe months ago, maybe last night, and had never shown him. And she had, in the middle of being dragged into a van, placed that page in her own pocket, not thrown it, not dropped it, placed it where a careful cop or a careful lawyer would find it. She had trusted the system to search her pockets before anyone else did. She had trusted the law, even a broken version of it, to read what she could not read herself. Duke closed his eyes for one long moment. 5 years old. Then he started the bike. He was arrested 3 miles outside Millbrook. He did not fight it. He had known from the moment he saw Roland Caldwell in the dark blue sedan that somebody had called in a tip. Not CPS, a different kind of tip. The kind that comes from a county commissioner who does not want a federal prosecutor seeing certain pages. The deputy who pulled him over was young, nervous. He kept one hand on the butt of his sidearm the whole time. "Sir," the deputy said, "I need you to step off the bike." Duke stepped off. "I need you to put your hands behind your head." Duke put his hands behind his head. "Sir, you are being detained on suspicion of involvement in the abduction and sheltering of a minor from the Maple Street foster residence." Duke said nothing. They cuffed him. They took his vest. They took his boots. They took the 4 pages. He watched the young deputy's face as the deputy opened them. The deputy's face went through 3 weather systems in 10 seconds. Confusion, then recognition, then a pale, sick understanding. The deputy looked up at Duke over the top of the pages. "Sir," the deputy said quietly, "what the hell is this?" Duke said, "That is evidence of a trafficking operation run out of your county foster care office by your county commissioner. I am going to need you to call the state attorney general. Ask for Joyce Brennan. Tell her Ironheart called in." The deputy stared at him. "Sir," he said, "I do not." "Son," Duke said, "I am in handcuffs. I am not resisting. I am not running. I am telling you a name and a contact. Whether you make the call or bury those pages in an evidence bag is going to be the decision that defines your whole career." The deputy swallowed. He folded the pages back up carefully, the way a man folds a flag. He did not put them in the evidence bag. He put them in his own front pocket. He drove Duke to the county lockup in silence. Duke sat in the holding cell for 6 hours. The cell was concrete. The light was fluorescent. There was a metal bench bolted to the wall and a toilet without a seat. A drunk in the next cell over sang 3 verses of an old country song and then fell asleep. Duke did not sleep. He sat on the bench with his elbows on his knees and his gray head bowed, and for the first time in 20 years he wept. Not loud, not shaking. Just 2 slow tracks down his weathered face, one from each eye lit green by the buzzing light above him. He wept for Josephine. He wept for Ruby. He wept mostly for the hours he had not been in either of their rooms when the door had opened and the wrong grown-up had walked in. At 7 in the evening, a deputy opened the door. "Visitor," the deputy said. Duke looked up. Opal Finch walked in. She was wearing her diner apron. Flour on her hands, she had not stopped to change. Next to her stood a man in his late 30s with Opal's same sharp cheekbones. Dark suit, battered briefcase, tie slightly crooked. He looked like a man who had driven 90 miles in 70 minutes. The deputy stepped out and closed the door. Opal sat down on the bench next to Duke. Her nephew remained standing. "Shepard Finch," the nephew said, "I'm your lawyer now, if that's all right with you." Duke wiped his face once hard with the heel of his hand. "It's all right with me." Shepard Finch opened the briefcase on the bench and took out a thin manila folder. "The deputy who brought you in," he said, "was named Troy Beckett. Troy Beckett made a phone call from his cruiser 20 minutes after he booked you. He did not call his supervisor. He called the direct line for Assistant Attorney General Joyce Brennan in Philadelphia. Ms. Brennan took his call. Ms. Brennan then called me. Ms. Brennan is, as of 40 minutes ago, driving to Harrisburg to convene a meeting with the Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI field office in Pittsburgh." Duke closed his eyes. The 4 pages, Shepard said, are currently in a sealed evidence envelope Signed into chain of custody by Deputy Beckett and countersigned by myself. A copy was made. The copy is at my aunt's diner. Another copy is as of 10 minutes ago at the offices of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Duke opened his eyes. Shepard smiled a small, tight smile. I believe in redundancy, he said. Opal patted Duke's knee. Mr. Sterling, Shepard said. Yeah. You are going to walk out of this cell tonight. Duke looked up at him. The charge against you is going to be dropped by morning, Shepard said, because the Webbs have already in separate interviews with the state police named you as the man who convinced them to turn themselves in and named Roland Caldwell as the man who paid them to do what they did. Duke's chest went hot. The Webbs are going to be charged, Shepard said. I will not lie to you, but they are going to be charged cooperatively. Under the State Witness Protection Program, which means Caldwell and the woman named Gloria Thorne and the two drivers named in the phone records on page 3 of those documents are going to be charged first and charged far more heavily and charged in federal court. Duke nodded. Mr. Sterling, Shepard said. Yes, the little girl, Shepard said. Duke's head came up. Ruby, Shepard said, is as of 3 hours ago in the emergency custody of the state, not the county. Duke exhaled, but Shepard said. Duke waited. Shepard's face got quieter. But Shepard said she is scheduled to be transferred tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to a placement foster family in a town called Ridgewood, 100 miles east of here. Duke stared at him. Mr. Sterling, Shepard said carefully. Does the word Ridgewood mean anything to you? Duke's mouth went dry. He reached behind himself automatically for a vest that was not there. Page 2, Duke said. The second address, P.O. Box in Ridgewood. Shepard nodded slow. The placement family, he said, is a private foster contractor who has taken on paper 3 of the 7 children on that list. Opal made a small sound in her throat. Duke stood up. He stood up so fast that Shepard stepped back and the handcuffs on his wrist rattled against the bench. There is one more thing, Shepard said. Duke looked at him. When they processed the child at the state shelter, Shepard said a social worker searched the pockets of her dress. Standard intake procedure. Duke's heart stopped. They found a folded piece of paper, Shepard said. Red crayon, very small. The social worker did not know what it was, but she was trained well enough to photograph it, log it, and forward it to the Attorney General's office. He opened the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a single torn page. Duke stepped closer. The page was different from the 4 he had carried. It was a ledger entry handwritten in a woman's hand. Gloria Thorne's hand, he was certain. Across the top of the page, in careful block letters, a child's letters. Letters Ruby had been practicing with her red crayon for 62 nights was a single word. Help. 4 letters this time. Not just the one. Duke sat back down slowly on the bench. She has been practicing, he said. Opal put her arm around his shoulders without a word. How many hours, Duke said. Shepard looked at his watch. 13 hours, he said. From right now. Duke turned to Opal. Opal, he said, I need my phone, I need my vest, I need my bike. She nodded. 10 minutes, Shepard said. I'll have the release paperwork signed by the duty sergeant. Shepard walked to the door and knocked. Opal stood up next to Duke. She did not smile. Mr. Sterling, she said very quietly. How many brothers did you call? The whole chapter, Duke said. She nodded. Then you had better, she said, tell them to ride all night. The door opened. The deputy waved Duke out. Duke stepped into the corridor. He was not shaking anymore. Somewhere in a placement home, 100 miles east, at 8 o'clock the next morning, A transport van was going to pull up to a house that was not a house. Somewhere on a dark blue sedan, a county commissioner was going to sit with a cell phone in his lap and tell the driver of that transport van to be very careful to take a quiet route to avoid the interstate. Duke Sterling was going to be on that route. He was going to bring 317 brothers with him. And he was going to bring a 5-year-old girl named Ruby Calloway home. Duke walked out of the county lockup at 7:43 in the evening. The air outside was cold in a way that only October air in western Pennsylvania knows how to be. Clean, sharp, the kind of cold that wakes a man up from the inside out. His bike was in the impound yard. Shepard Finch had signed 3 pieces of paper to get it released. Opal Finch had brought Duke a thermos of Peefy and a brown paper bag with 2 of her biscuits wrapped inside a cloth napkin. "Eat in the saddle," she said. "You have got a long night." Duke nodded. He was about to swing a leg over the bike when he heard the first engine, then the second, then the third. Then very fast, a sound that rose up from the south end of Millbrook like thunder rolling in from a county, over a sound that made the 3 men smoking outside the county jail turn their heads all at once, a sound that made the street lights seem to tremble in their housings. Motorcycles, not 4, not 40, more. They came up Main Street 2 by 2 in a long black ribbon. Headlights, burning chrome, throwing back the last blue of the sky, and the rumble of them rolled through the concrete of Millbrook like weather. Duke stood beside his bike and watched them come. They pulled into the jail parking lot in a wide arc engines, cutting out one after another, a long, rolling silence settling behind the noise. Riders dismounted. Leather, gray beards, patched vests, some of them so old the patches had gone the color of tea. 317 brothers. Duke did not count them. He did not have to. Burl Madigan had counted for him. The man at the head of the line swung off his bike and walked straight to Duke. He was Duke's age, shorter, thicker, a beard so white it looked lit. His vest said President over the left breast. Burl Madigan did not embrace him. He put one hand on Duke's shoulder. He squeezed once. "Brother Burl said." Brother Duke said, "Tell us where." Burl said. Duke swallowed the knot in his throat. "We ride east," he said, "toward Ridgewood. There is a transport van leaving the emergency shelter here at 8 tomorrow morning with a 5-year-old girl inside. The driver will be told to take back roads. We need to be on every back road between here and Ridgewood by sunrise." Burl nodded once. A younger man pushed to the front. Not young, 40s, black frame glasses. A long face and quick eyes and a laptop bag slung across his chest over his vest. "Sparrow," the man said. Duke nodded. "Sparrow," Duke said, "I need you to find the route before Caldwell writes it. I need you inside his email." Sparrow smiled a small, unpleasant smile. "Give me 20 minutes in a booth in that diner," he said. Another man stepped up. Huge, gray braid, a red cross patch sewn long ago onto the sleeve of his vest. "Grizzly," the man said. "Corpsman retired. I brought trauma kits for 15 plus 2 pediatric sets, in case she needs anything when we get her." Duke's throat tightened. "Thank you, brother." A fourth man came forward, tall, thin, a bookkeeper's face, a $300 briefcase. "Pitchfork," he said. "You want me on the numbers in those pages. I want you on the numbers in those pages," Duke said, "and I want you ready to walk into a federal courtroom the day they ask you to." Pitchfork nodded. "Already am," he said. Burl looked around at the men behind him. Then he looked back at Duke. "Brother," Burl said, "tell us about the child." Duke closed his eyes for a moment. "Her name is Ruby," he said. "She is 5 years old. She hid the evidence that is going to hang Roland Caldwell for 62 nights inside the lining of her sweater. She was teaching herself to write the word help the whole time. She calls me Mr. Bear. Behind Burl, somewhere in the line, a big man made a sound in his throat that was not a word. Another man took off his cap. Another said very quietly, Jesus. Burl nodded. Then we ride, he said. Sparrow had Roland Caldwell's email inside 14 minutes. He did it in the back booth at Opal's diner, with Opal pouring coffee and Shepard Finch sitting across from him, reading every document the moment Sparrow printed it. At 8:27 in the evening, Sparrow looked up. Got it, he said. Duke leaned over his shoulder. On the laptop screen was a chain of emails between Roland Caldwell and a private foster contractor in Ridgewood named Elwood House Placements. The emails had been sent over the last 10 months. They used careful bureaucratic language. Placement, transfer, onboarding. The most recent email had gone out at 7:11 that evening, less than an hour ago. Duke read it. Subject, arrival adjustment. The original plan moved the child via Interstate 80 East to exit 161. Given the events of this afternoon, we are adjusting. Transport will depart at 0600, not 0800 to avoid morning light. Route will be State Route 17 to County Road 4, 04 to the private drive at coordinates attached. Driver is authorized. No stops. Below the email attached in a PDF was a map. Sparrow tapped the screen. 6 a.m., he said, not 8. They moved it up. Duke looked at the map. Route 17 was a 2-lane country road. It ran 38 miles through farmland and maples before it hit County Road 404. There were exactly 3 gas stations along that stretch. One of them sat at a fork where 17 met a road called Old Mill Creek Pike. Duke pointed at the gas station. There, he said. Burl Madigan leaned in beside him. Why there, brother? Because Duke said he will have to slow down for the stop sign. And because there is an abandoned cement silo on the west side of the road, half a mile south where we can stage. And because on the east side of the road there is a state police substation, we are going to want within shouting distance when the doors of that van open. Burl looked at Sparrow. Sparrow said I can have the state troopers at that substation briefed and on standby by 4 a.m. I have a contact at the Attorney General's office. Duke said her name is Joyce Brennan. Sparrow glanced up surprised. Then he smiled. Small world, he said. Shepard Finch closed the folder in front of him. Gentlemen, he said quietly, I want to say something. The booth went still. Shepard did not raise his voice. He did not have to. This cannot be a scene, he said. This cannot be something a newspaper describes tomorrow as vigilante justice. If you get to that gas station before the van, I do not want a single one of you to raise a hand to the driver. I do not want so much as a raised voice. I want headlights. I want numbers. I want silence. And I want the state police with a federal warrant I will have in my hand by 3 a.m. to walk up to the van and take custody of the child legally in front of 300 witnesses who are, as of this moment, also officially witnesses in a federal trafficking case. He looked around. The most powerful thing you can do tomorrow morning, Shepard said, is be present and be quiet. Burl Madigan was older than Shepard by 20 years, patched older than Shepard had been alive. He looked at the young lawyer the way a bear looks at a man holding a book. Then Burl nodded once. You heard the man, he said, and that by itself was the law of the Hells Angels North chapter for the rest of the night. They rolled east out of Millbrook at 10 p.m., 317 motorcycles. They did not ride in a tight pack. Sparrow had them broken into cells of 12 to 15. Each cell assigned a road, each road assigned a waypoint. The idea was not to be a parade. The idea was to be a net. Duke rode at the front of the lead cell with Burl on his right and Grizzly on his left. Behind them, the others peeled off one by one at each intersection, heading out to their posts on Route 17 on the county roads on the forgotten farm lanes a trafficker might use as a bypass. By 2 a.m., every mile of road between Millbrook and Ridgewood had at least 4 sets of headlights waiting in the dark. By 3 a.m., Shepard Finch had a federal emergency warrant in his hand. By 4 a.m., Joyce Brennan had made the call. A Pennsylvania State Police tactical unit plus 2 FBI agents out of the Pittsburgh field office had taken up quiet position behind the cement silo half a mile south of the gas station at the fork of Route 17 and Old Mill Creek Pike. By 5 a.m., the eastern sky was the color of wet slate. Duke sat on his bike at the north edge of the Keene Station parking lot. Burl beside him, Grizzly across the lot. Sparrow inside the gas station buying a cup of black coffee from a boy behind the counter who did not understand why his parking lot was full of old men in leather who had all somehow bought gas at once and were now simply standing beside their bikes, not speaking, not moving, watching the southern bend of Route 17. At 5:41, headlights came around the bend. A white van. Transport stenciled on the side in small letters. Duke's hands did not shake. They had been shaking for 3 days. Now they were still. The van slowed for the stop sign at the fork. The driver was a heavy-set man in his 50s. Duke could see him through the windshield, a baseball cap, a short gray beard, a wedding ring on the hand that held the wheel. On the passenger side on the floor of the van, Duke could see the edge of a child's booster seat. Ruby was in that van. The driver looked up and saw the gas station parking lot. He saw motorcycles. Not 10, not 20, 64 in this one lot visible from the stop sign. The driver's face went the color of the slate sky. His hand moved fast toward the gear shift. He never got there. From the gas pumps, a brother named Salam stepped out onto the shoulder of the road very calmly with both hands raised and empty and walked toward the driver's side window. Behind Salam, another brother stepped out, then another, then another. They did not rush the van, they walked. They walked slowly. They formed, without discussing it, a loose half circle that the van could no longer reverse out of without running a man down in broad daylight on a state road. The driver looked in his rearview mirror. In his rearview mirror, 3 state police cruisers were rolling silently up from the south light bars, dark coming fast. The driver did something Duke had not expected. He put the van in park. He put both of his hands on the steering wheel very visibly. He lowered his forehead to the steering wheel. He closed his eyes. Duke understood in that moment that the driver of this van was not a true believer. The driver of this van was a man who had been offered money he could not refuse to look the other way for as many trips as Caldwell asked him to make. And this man had spent every one of those drives waiting for the morning he was about to have. This morning had come. The state troopers approached the van with weapons holstered but visible. Sergeant Eliza Holcomb, Pennsylvania State Police, tapped on the driver's side window with one knuckle. "Sir," she said, "I need you to step out of the vehicle. You are not under arrest at this time. We are taking custody of the minor in your back seat under federal warrant." The driver nodded. He opened the door. He stepped out. He put his hands on the hood of his own van. From the far side of the van, a female trooper named Ramsey opened the sliding door, and there, strapped into a booster seat, in a county-issued gray sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, pale, hollow-eyed, clutching a one-eyed teddy bear against her chest as if the teddy bear were the last thing in the world that was hers, was Ruby Calloway. Ruby looked up. She saw the trooper. She saw the sky behind the trooper. She saw across the gas station parking lot a wall of motorcycles, and behind the motorcycles a wall of men, and at the front of the men standing alone beside a bike, a big man with an iron gray beard and a leather vest with old patches. Her mouth opened. Mr. Bear. Her voice was small, crackly from screaming the day before. But Duke heard it. He heard it the way a man hears his own name in a crowd of strangers. Trooper Ramsey looked back toward Duke, questioning. Sergeant Holcomb, standing at the driver's door, looked across at Duke and nodded once. Duke walked. He walked the 30 feet from his bike to the open door of the transport van. He did not run. He did not hurry. His old boots made a slow, deliberate sound on the asphalt that every man in that parking lot would remember for the rest of his life. He stopped at the open door. He crouched down. He did not reach for her yet. He let her see him first. Ruby looked at him. Her bottom lip trembled once. Then she said the way a 5-year-old says a thing she has rehearsed for 62 nights in the dark, the way a prayer comes out of a child who has been told there is no one listening, but who has kept praying anyway. You came. I did, he said. I came. Her small face crumpled. And then, and only then, Duke Sterling reached into the van and unbuckled the straps of the booster seat, and he lifted Ruby Calloway out into the gray October morning, and he held her against his chest with one hand behind her head and one hand under her knees, the way a man holds a sleeping child, the way a man holds a child who has finally, after everything, been allowed to be a child again. Ruby pressed her face into his neck. She did not cry loudly. She cried the way people cry when they have been waiting a very long time for permission. Across the parking lot, 316 men took off their caps. Not one of them spoke. Duke stood in the middle of that silence with a 5-year-old girl in his arms, and he felt for the first time in 20 years the precise shape of the thing that had been missing. The hearing was 4 days later. The room was small, county courtroom in Millbrook, wood-paneled, a flag in the corner, a bench that had been polished by 40 years of elbows. Outside on the lawn, 317 motorcycles were parked in rows. Inside the gallery was full. Wendell and Edith Webb sat together at the defense table in county jumpsuits, their hands folded, their eyes down. They had been charged. They had also, under the witness protection agreement Shepard Finch had negotiated, provided 192 pages of signed testimony against Roland Caldwell, Gloria Thorne, and 4 other names the investigation had turned up. At a second defense table, alone without counsel, because 2 law firms had withdrawn from his case in the last 72 hours, sat Roland Caldwell. His silver hair had lost its precision. His clean gray suit had gone slightly rumpled. He looked like a man who had just begun to understand that the room he had built around himself had been all along a room somebody else had the key to. At the prosecution table sat Assistant Attorney General Joyce Brennan of Pennsylvania, and beside her the federal prosecutor who had driven in from Pittsburgh, a woman named Margaret Ives. Pitchfork was a witness. He testified for 2 hours. He walked the jury, slow and careful and devastating, through 7 years of Roland Caldwell's financial records. Shell companies, cash withdrawals that matched to the week every disappearance of a child from the county foster system. A private P.O. box in Ridgewood that had received a total of $231,000 over 18 months. When Pitchfork sat down, the jury was not looking at him anymore. The jury was looking at Roland Caldwell. Then Gloria Thorne was brought in. She had been arrested at home the morning of the West Station operation. She had pled out. She named Caldwell from the witness stand. She named the 2 drivers. She named the contact at Elwood House Placements. By the time she was finished, the federal prosecutor did not have to give her a closing argument, but she did anyway. When she finished, Margaret Ives remained standing. "Your Honor," she said, "before we proceed to sentencing, the prosecution has one final witness. Judge Honor Delacroix had been on the bench for 22 years. She looked over the top of her reading glasses. Ms. Ives, the prosecution calls Ruby Calloway. A small sound went through the gallery. Duke, sitting in the front row with his hands folded on his knee, turned his head. At the back of the courtroom, a bailiff had opened a side door. Ruby walked through it. She was wearing a new dress, dark blue, simple. Shepard Finch's wife had bought it for her the day before because nobody had wanted to put her back in anything she had worn in Gloria Thorne's house. She held Bear in her left arm. Her right hand was in the hand of Shepard Finch's wife, a woman named Kate, who had in 4 days become something close to an aunt to her. Ruby did not look at Duke. Ruby looked straight ahead at the witness stand. The bailiff helped her up into the chair. Bear sat in her lap. She was so small that only her head and shoulders showed above the microphone. Judge Delacroix adjusted the microphone down toward her. "Honey," the judge said gently. Ruby looked up at the judge. "You know where you are," the judge said. "Yes, ma'am," Ruby said. "This is the place where they decide what is true." A sound went through the gallery that was very close to a sob. Margaret Ives walked out from behind the prosecution table. She carried no notes. She stopped a respectful distance from the witness stand and crouched slightly so that she was closer to Ruby's height. "Ruby," she said, "I am going to ask you just a few questions. You do not have to be afraid. If you do not know the answer, you can say so. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Ruby Margaret Ives said, "I want you to look around this courtroom. Take your time and tell me if you see anyone you recognize from Miss Gloria's house." Ruby looked. She looked at the gallery. She looked at the jury. She looked at the defense tables. And then her gaze stopped on Roland Caldwell. He was sitting with his hands folded, trying Duke could see it to arrange his silver-haired face into something dignified and innocent. A man arranges a tie in a mirror before a funeral. Ruby raised one small finger, slowly the way she had shown Duke in the barn, the way she had shown the Webbs in the kitchen. She pointed at Caldwell. And then she did the thing. She moved her finger in the air. Slow, deliberate. 1, AFIM, 2, 3, oh, and you replies. She stopped on nothing this time because she was alone on the stand, but every person in that courtroom understood exactly what she was showing them. "He did that," Ruby said, "in Miss Gloria's kitchen. He came in a gray suit. He came in a blue car. He gave Miss Gloria money. He counted us, Tyler in March, Sophia in May, Benji in July, and me the last time." Her voice was very even. "He said I was worth 18, she said. Roland Caldwell's silver head sank slowly onto his folded hands. Margaret Ives did not move. "One more thing," she said gently, "and then we are done. Ruby, can you tell the court why, when you were taken from the Webb's farm, you put a piece of paper in the back pocket of your dress?" Ruby nodded, "Because," she said, "I knew a grown-up would search me. That is what they do. And I knew that if a grown-up read the word would be in the law now. And if the word was in the law, Mr. Bear would not have to carry it by himself." "What word?" Margaret Ives asked. Ruby leaned closer to the microphone. "Help," she said. It had taken her 62 nights to learn to write it. She had spelled it correctly. "Can I be done now?" Ruby asked. "Yes, honey," Judge Delacroix said through a hand that had risen to her mouth. "You can be done." Ruby climbed down from the witness stand with Bear under her arm and walked back up the aisle to Kate Finch, who took her hand without a word. Margaret Ives turned to the judge. "The prosecution rests." Judge Delacroix set her pen down. She looked at Roland Caldwell for a long moment. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "you are a disgrace to the office you held and to the state you served. It is my intention to recommend to the federal court in whose jurisdiction your conspiracy primarily operated the maximum statutory sentence." Roland Caldwell did not speak. He was led away in handcuffs. When the deputy closed the courtroom door behind him, a sound went through the gallery that was not quite applause. It was quieter than that. It was the sound 300 men make when they have been holding their breath for a long time and are at last allowed to let it out. Then Judge Delacroix turned her attention to the Webbs. She spoke to them for a long time. She spoke of grief. She spoke of the particular cruelty of a man who had recognized grief in two vulnerable people and had used it as a lever. She spoke of accountability. And then she gave Wendell and Edith Webb 2 years of suspended sentence mandatory grief counseling, 4 years of supervised probation, and ordered Wendell to complete 600 hours of community service at a children's hospice. Edith Webb began to cry quietly into her hands. Wendell Webb reached across and took her wrist the way he had taken it at the kitchen table on the morning everything had changed. The judge allowed them a moment. Then she looked out over the gallery. "There is one matter remaining," Judge Delacroix said. She looked at a folder on her bench. "The matter," she said, "of the guardianship of Ruby Calloway, age 5. Ruby, already on her feet beside Kate Finch, did not wait to be called. She walked down the center aisle on her own small feet with Bear under her arm, the way a grown woman walks toward a pew she has been coming to all her life. She walked past the Webb's table. She stopped. She reached out one small hand and touched Edith Webb's wrist. "I forgive you," Ruby said. Edith Webb made a sound like a cracking tree. Wendell Webb put his forehead on the defense table and did not raise it for a long time. Ruby walked on. She did not go to the witness stand this time. She went to the front row. She went to Duke. She stopped in front of him, and she looked up at him, and she held out her hand. Duke did not move. "Come with me," Ruby said. Duke stood. Together, Ruby Calloway and Duke Sterling walked the last 5 feet to the front of the courtroom, her small hand inside his rough one. Judge Delacroix looked at them both. "Miss Calloway," the judge said. "Yes, ma'am." "Can you tell this court," the judge said, "in your own words, who you would like to live with?" Ruby looked up at Duke. Then she looked at the judge. "I pick Mr. Bear," she said. A small sound went through the courtroom. "Can you tell the court," the judge said, "Mr. Bear's legal name?" Ruby thought about this very seriously. "His name is Duke Sterling," she said. "But his real name is Mr. Bear. He is the one who came when I threw the bear out the window. He is the one who read the letter H. He is the one who found me at the gas station. He is the one who keeps the coming back promise." The judge's hand resting on the folder moved to cover her mouth for a moment. "Mr. Sterling," she said. Duke stood straighter. "Yes, Your Honor. This court has before it," the judge said, "a petition filed on your behalf by counsel Shepard Finch for temporary guardianship of the minor Ruby Calloway with the intent to pursue full adoption, pending the completion of home study background review and all other statutory requirements under Pennsylvania family law." Duke swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." The court, Judge Delacroix said, has reviewed the petition. The court has reviewed the home study performed this morning by the State Family Services Office. The court has reviewed the background of the petitioner, including his criminal record, which is not, I note for the record, inconsequential. Duke did not flinch. The court has also reviewed, the judge said, 22 letters of support submitted on Mr. Sterling's behalf, including one from a diner owner in this county, one from a former corpsman with the United States Marine Corps, one from a retired forensic accountant, and one from the Assistant Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania. She paused. And the court, Judge Delacroix said, has reviewed the clearly expressed wishes of the minor herself. She closed the folder. "It is the ruling of this court," she said, "that temporary guardianship of Ruby Calloway is granted to Duke Sterling, effective immediately pending full adoption proceedings which I have every expectation will be completed by the spring. Duke did not move. He could not for a moment feel his legs. Ruby's small hand squeezed his. "Sit down in a minute," Burl Madigan said from behind him very quietly. "You are going to fall over." But Duke did not sit down. He had one more thing to do. He turned to Burl in the front row. Burl had a small wooden box on his lap, the kind of box a man carries home from a furniture shop or from a funeral. Burl handed it to him. Duke took it. He knelt down slowly so that his eyes were level with Ruby's eyes. Ruby watched him. The courtroom had not emptied. 300 people, jurors and lawyers and troopers and bikers, were very quiet. Duke opened the wooden box. Inside, folded smaller. The way a man folds a thing he has kept for 20 years was a child's leather vest. Black, hand-stitched. A small patch sewn over the left breast that read in tiny white thread, "Property of Daddy." He had sewn the patch himself in a motel room outside Toledo the week before the fire. Josie had never worn it. He had carried it in a locked metal box under the seat of every motorcycle he had owned for 20 years. Until tonight. "This," Duke said, "was for my daughter." Ruby looked at the vest. "She never got to wear it," Duke said. His voice was rough. "I have carried it a long time. I would like for you to have it, if you want it." Ruby reached out one small hand and touched the tiny white stitching. Her fingers traced each letter. "Does it mean I belong to you?" she said. Duke's throat closed. "It means he said that I belong to you." Ruby nodded, small and serious. Then she turned around and held out her arms. Duke slipped the small leather vest over her shoulders. It fit her almost perfectly. The patches that had been too large for Josie at 4 were just right for Ruby at 5. She turned back around, wearing it with Bear under one arm. She looked up at him. "Okay," she said. Then she took his rough hand in her small one. And together, a 5-year-old girl in a leather vest and a 55-year-old man, who had finally come home, they walked down the center aisle of the Millbrook County Courthouse, past the Webbs, past Opal, past the silent pews of brothers with their caps off, and out into the October light. Outside the courthouse, 317 engines started at once. The sound rolled down the main street of Millbrook and kept rolling, and in the back of the black pickup truck that Burl had driven down to haul gear, Duke sat on the tailgate with Ruby in his lap, and the two of them watched the bikes peel off in long, slow waves, each brother lifting one hand in salute as he rolled past. Ruby waved back to each one. 317 times. Her small hand never got tired. The house was 20 miles outside Millbrook. It had belonged to Duke's grandmother. He had bought it back from a cousin 8 years ago for reasons he had never been able to fully explain to himself, and he had let it sit mostly empty ever since visiting twice a year to cut the grass and pay the taxes. Now he stood on the porch with the 5-year-old girl's hand in his, and he understood why he had kept it. Ruby looked up at the house. It was white, 2 stories, a porch swing on chains. "Is this where we live?" she said. "If you like it," he said. Ruby considered the house. Then she considered the porch swing. Then she nodded, once solemn as a judge. "I like it," she said. That night was the first night. Opal Finch had driven out ahead of them and had stocked the kitchen. Kate Finch had brought sheets and towels and a small stuffed rabbit she had found in her attic, because she had thought correctly that Bear might like a friend. Grizzly had ridden out behind them and had quietly checked every window lock, every door hinge, every closet with the thoroughness of a man who had once cleared houses for a living. When Grizzly was satisfied, he stood in the front hall a moment, cap in his hands. "Brother," he said to Duke. "Yeah, the pantry," Grizzly said. Duke looked at him. Ruby was in the living room, sitting on the braided rug, introducing Bear to his new rabbit friend. She was still wearing the small leather vest. The pantry off the kitchen, Grizzly said. It has a padlock. Previous owner must have used it for something. You want me to take it off? Duke stared at the older man for a second. Then he said no. Grizzly looked at him. I want to do that one myself, Duke said. Grizzly nodded once and put his cap back on and saw himself out. Duke walked into the kitchen. The pantry door was a narrow wooden one with a black hasp and a brass padlock. The padlock was not very strong. He could have snapped it with a hammer. He did not want to snap it. He wanted Ruby to see. He walked into the living room. Ruby, he said. She looked up. Come see something with me. She stood up, Bear under one arm, Rabbit under the other, and followed him into the kitchen. Duke opened his saddlebag on the counter and took out a pair of heavy bolt cutters he had carried for 20 years and had used in all that time only for honest things, like shed locks on storage units and the occasional busted chain on a brother's bike. He knelt down in front of the pantry door so that his eyes were level with Ruby's eyes. Ruby, he said, I want to show you something, and I want you to watch me do it, and I want you to remember it. She nodded. There are things, Duke said, that lock in this house. Doors lock. The front door locks. Your bedroom door has a lock on the inside. You can use that lock whenever you want to, and you never ever have to explain why. Ruby nodded, small and serious. But Duke said, and his voice roughened, but food does not lock, not in this house, not ever. He put the bolt cutters on the shackle of the padlock. He squeezed. The lock snapped clean and fell to the kitchen floor with a small flat sound. Duke picked up the broken lock and handed it to Ruby. You can throw that away, he said, or you can keep it. That is your decision, but I wanted you to see it break. Ruby turned the broken lock over in her small hands. Then she looked up at him. Can I keep it? She asked. Yes. She nodded. Then she put the lock in the pocket of her dress under the edge of the small leather vest, and she opened the pantry door on its hinges and she walked inside. The pantry was full. Opal had filled it. Boxes of cereal, jars of peanut butter, cans of soup, a loaf of bread, a bag of apples on the middle shelf, crackers, 2 bags of the cheese crackers that had been the only thing Ruby had eaten on the drive home. Ruby stood in the middle of the pantry and looked up at the shelves. Her small face did something Duke did not have a word for. It was not joy exactly. It was closer to the look a drought country farmer gets when the rain finally hits his roof. She turned around. She walked back out of the pantry. She took Duke's hand. Okay, she said, and then she said very quietly, I am hungry. Duke made her a bowl of cereal. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and watched her eat it. She ate slowly. She did not look up at him while she ate. When she was finished, she put her spoon down and she said, I would like to go to bed now, please. He carried her up the stairs. He had not carried a child up a flight of stairs in 20 years. His back complained. He did not notice. Her bedroom had been his grandmother's sewing room. Kate Finch had made the bed up with a pale yellow quilt. There was a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon plugged into the wall. There was the stuffed rabbit on the pillow beside where Bear would go. Ruby sat down on the edge of the bed. She looked at the little leather vest she was wearing. Can I sleep in it? She asked. Duke's throat closed. Yes, honey, he said. You can sleep in it anytime you want. She nodded. She got under the quilt with the vest on. She placed Bear on her left and the rabbit on her right, and she pulled the yellow quilt up to her chin. Duke sat down on the edge of the mattress. He did not know what to say. He had not tucked a child in 20 years. Ruby saved him. She said, Are you going to sit in the hall? He looked at her. "Do you want me to?" he said. She thought about this. "Yes," she said, "for a little while, with the door open." "Okay," he said. She looked at him for another long moment. "Mr. Bear," she said. "Yeah, honey, I am going to check the lock," she said. "I am going to check it a lot of times, probably. I do not want you to feel bad about that." Duke's throat closed. "I will not feel bad about that," he said. "Okay," she said. He stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "Ruby," he said. "Yeah. I never got the chance," he said, "to tuck my daughter in on the last night. I was away. I have." He swallowed. "I have spent a long time being sorry about that." Ruby watched him. "I am going to try," Duke said, "to get the next 20 years right." Ruby nodded small. "Okay," she said. He stepped into the hall. He sat down on the floor with his back against the wall beside her doorway. From where he sat, he could see the edge of her bed. He could see Bear's one glass eye catching the moonlight. He could see the small, black leather on her shoulder where the vest lay across the quilt. A minute passed. Ruby got out of bed. She walked to the door. She tested the knob lock, turning it left, turning it right, turning it left. She got back in bed. 2 minutes passed. She got up again. She tested the lock again. She got back in bed. Duke did not say anything. She tested it 11 times. On the 11th time, she stood in the doorway and looked at him on the floor. "It still works," she said. "I know it does," he said. "I know you know," she said. And then for the first time, something that was almost a smile ghosted across her face. She got back in bed. She did not test it again. Within 6 minutes, her breathing changed. Duke sat against the wall in the dark hallway and listened to the small sound of a sleeping child breathing through an open door. He did not move. He did not sleep. He did not want to sleep. He stayed there with his back against the wall and his hands folded on his knees and his own vest folded beside him on the floor. And somewhere toward 2 in the morning, he realized that the weight in his chest, the weight he had been carrying for 20 years, the weight shaped exactly like a 5-year-old girl in pajamas with little yellow ducks on them, had not gone away. But something else had come to sit beside it, something that was not lighter, something that was warmer. 13 nights later, Duke was in his usual spot on the floor of the hallway, his back against the wall, when Ruby did not get up to check the lock at all. She had not checked it the night before either, or the night before that. But on this particular night in her sleep, her small hand came out from under the yellow quilt. It reached toward the edge of the mattress. Her fingers opened and closed once, searching the way a baby's fingers search. Duke watched. Very quietly, he stood up. He crossed the room in his sock feet. He knelt beside the bed. He put his rough, scarred finger into her open hand. Her fingers closed around his finger. She did not wake up. Her face in the moonlight through the yellow curtains was the face of a 5-year-old girl. Not a survivor, not a witness, not a piece of evidence. A girl. The small leather vest lay folded at the foot of the bed where she had placed it before sleep, with its tiny patch face up. Duke did not move. He knelt there on the hardwood floor beside her bed with a small hand curled around his finger, and he stayed there until the sky outside the window started to turn blue. Somewhere 20 miles away, a courthouse was closed for the weekend. Somewhere 200 miles east, a man named Roland Caldwell was beginning the first weekend of what would become 40 years. Somewhere in a quieter building, Wendell and Edith Webb were sitting together in a small apartment the state had placed them in for the duration of their probation, and Edith was holding a framed photograph of a little girl in a knit cap, and Wendell was holding Edith. And somewhere in a white house with a porch swing, a big man with an iron gray beard knelt on a hardwood floor while the sun came up and did not move his hand. 20 years ago, he had failed one little girl. Tonight, surrounded by nothing grander than the small sound of a child breathing and the warm weight of her hand around his finger, he had not failed another. Not this time. Not ever again.